if we can't defend free speech, if we can't defend open discourse, if we can't make the argument, which this conference is about, by the way, which is that our democracies are good, that Western values are good, that individual rights are good. If we can't do that, then whether China decides to invade us or destroy our currency or whatever might happen with Russia, Ukraine, that will all be secondary.
Dave, I want to start off by looking at Trump's first 2 weeks in office. How are you finding it so far?
Oh, it's been absolutely incredible. I think he's promised an awful lot, and every day it seems like he's just knocking down another barrier that we have had. Really, we've had these barriers in our country, but I see these barriers everywhere. I think that's really what this conference is about. I mean, Trump ran on fixing the whole damn thing, and he's doing it. Even if you look at what he's done in the last couple, it's only been a month or so, but to do so much so quickly, so fixing the border, working on deportations, exposing all of this insane spending with USAID and just the general corruption of the swamp or whatever you want to call it, reordering our international treaties, helping Israel hopefully end this war, hopefully ending the Russia-Ukraine war. He's doing absolutely everything, but what I'm most struck by actually is the fact that it's being done right in front of us. We're coming out of a 4-year stupor where in effect we had a man with dementia who is president that was hidden largely by the media, and then whatever the game that was played to install Kamala, and it all happened right, it sort of happened in front of our eyes, but we didn't see how any of it happened. Now it's like we're seeing how all of this is happening. We're seeing receipts when they're going in and uncovering stuff from Doge, and it's really been incredible. And you can feel it here, by the way, which we're across the pond, but you can feel that when things are starting to work in America, it helps the UK, it helps Europe, it helps the entire world.
I'm interested in your point there about being provided with the receipts. When we look at Doge and what Musk is doing there, there's concerns there that this is a non-governmental agency that's potentially been given unconstitutional power to access highly sensitive information. But also on the other hand, we've got concerns that there's potential conflicts of interest there between Musk running this agency, but then also his business interests. When we hear Musk and Trump, for example, saying that they found billions of dollars of fraud and abuse, we aren't being provided with the evidence to suggest that extent of criminal activity.
Right. So I think there's a couple things going on here. First off, the corruption was so deep, the amount of spending was so erroneous and ridiculous.
Is it correct to use the words fraud and abuse, corruption?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I think what we have seen from USAID, from so many of our government institutions, from the Department of Education, the amount, yes, is it fraud? Absolutely. Is it abuse? Absolutely. Half of these people that work for these institutions don't go to work. We are just at the beginning of uncovering this. To your point about concern that over time, could there be some level of Elon has business interests that align in some way and now he's become part of this administration in effect? Of course there's some worry there. But if we were ever going to fix any of this, if we were going to drain the swamp, if we were going to open up the books, if we were going to see that we are pouring money into radical anti-American organizations all over the world, anti-democratic organizations all over the world, all these things, then we're going in and we're just breaking a lot of eggs at the moment. And then some of that I think some of that will shake out.
Yeah, and we've seen in the past there have been examples of fraud being found in federal agencies. We can't completely dismiss that there might potentially not be cases of fraud moving forwards, but there's a question there about, is Trump using words of fraud and abuse interchangeably with examples of waste, for example? I mean, fraud is a big word.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with him using the word fraud. I think when you see that we're funding trans comic books in Peru and we're funding all of this ridiculous woke stuff all over Africa, and the condoms here and all of this nonsense, whether you want to say it's fraud or waste or abuse, it's probably some combination of all of those things. So I wouldn't get too worried. Personally, I wouldn't be too worried about the technical terms.
Well, I guess, experts on this would be concerned by the interchange of those words. I mean, I wanted to pick you up on some of those points there. You talked about trans comic books, you talked about the condoms. But I mean, one example that in one of your videos, you shared a post by Elon Musk that the New York Times had been paid tens of millions of dollars in the past 5 years to the news outlet. I mean, this has been debunked. You even include in your video a little note to say that the total figure is much less. In fact, the total figure was 1.6 million for the past 5 years. But that was spent almost entirely on subscriptions, ads, legal notices, delivery charges, and even in Trump's first administration.
I don't know what the government is paying the New York Times for subscriptions and all sorts of other things.
It's 1.6 million for the past 5 years.
Right.
The majority of that was subscriptions.
Right. I just don't know what the government is using our tax dollars to subscribe to the New York Times.
But even under Trump's first administration, they were still also doing that. They were still paying for these subscriptions to the New York Times.
Well, I don't think Trump realized the level, the depth, I would say, of the swamp, really.
But you use the words, so you wonder why they've lied about everything, referring to the New York Times, because the government was funding them. I mean, do you still stand by those claims? Even in your own video, you made an editor's note to say that the total was far less.
Yeah.
Would you concede
honestly,
on that?
I'm not totally sure of the video you're talking about, but I think it is fairly obvious if you've been tracking American politics and particularly American media for the last few years, that the New York Times, in essence, has acted as an arm of the Democrat Party. That is deeply, deeply connected to everything that's being exposed with USAID right now. And that is why I would say the New York Times has gone out of its way, no matter who, anyone that basically walks away from progressive groupthink is going to be attacked or destroyed by the New York Times. They've made it very clear that they're not really, I would say, an organization that is committed to truth or journalistic integrity. They're an activist organization.
I mean, I guess that's your opinion on that point, but you can concede that it wasn't tens of millions of dollars that was given to the New York
Honestly, I
Times.
don't remember the exact video. Okay. I don't.
I want to move on to Ukraine. We're hearing a lot from Trump at the moment about what his plans are there. There is concerns there that he's already giving concessions to Russia before these negotiations have even started. What do you make of those?
I mean, my general position on Ukraine is the same as it was probably 3 years ago when this all started, which is that you can't invade a sovereign nation. We have borders that exist for reasons. That being said, Russia, as Kamala Harris said, is big and Ukraine is small, and there's going to have to be some territorial concession there. At the end of the day, Putin has nukes. That is just true. He doesn't want NATO on his border, and hopefully there'll be some negotiated settlement. I think it's actually going to happen fairly quickly. I would guess, as we sit here now, I think we probably have about 3 months of negotiations, something like that. And I think it's going to wrap up, and no one will get fully what they want. Russia's not going to have as much territory as they want. Ukraine will look a little bit different on the map, and that will be that.
I guess.
But the money train, the giant laundering money train, which it absolutely is. I've had Rand Paul on my show talking about the amount of money that we've given to Ukraine, and we have no receipts. We have no idea what we funded. We're paying for pensions for Ukrainian workers, all sorts of things that makes no sense, which again I would connect to the USAID and the overall ethos of the Trump administration, which is to eliminate this waste and fraud, or whatever you want to call it.
And I guess there is an argument there about the benefits of the US investing in the war in Ukraine, US aid, in terms of also protecting the national security of America itself. But if we go back to what Trump said so far, we look at what the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said, he's already suggested that, 2014 borders might not be restored. We heard that US troops might not be sent to Ukraine. And then we had that U-turn from Pete saying that actually, no, everything's still on the table. It doesn't give an image of a strong, united America to Russia. I mean, what bargaining power does the US have if they've already said they might not send troops there?
I think this is what Trump does. He throws out an awful lot of things. Look what he's doing with Gaza right now. He throws out a bunch of things. You don't know exactly what he thinks, and that's all part of a negotiation tactic with him. So again, what we have been through for 3 years of the Ukrainian war from an American perspective is we've basically been told you either are for the war and you're endlessly funding it and shut up, or you're somehow anti-American. That's completely insane. I'm largely agnostic on the war in that I don't think there was a compelling argument made for why. I'm sure one could make a compelling argument for why we should stop Russia from going into Ukraine, but it was never made by our previous administration. So at the moment, if you're hearing all sorts of messages that feel like they're a little all over the place from this administration, I think it's a negotiation tactic. Trump has made it clear he wants to end the war, and he's going to end the war.
I mean, a lot of critics would suggest that it doesn't suggest strong negotiation tactics. It suggests confusion.
But we've had no negotiation tactics, right? We've been in an endless boondoggle that we have just poured money into, so we are doing it somewhat differently.
And it is going to be a difficult one how these negotiations move forward. But if, for example, if Trump still stands on that US troops might not be sent to Ukraine in terms of peace building, peacekeeping initiatives, what sort of image does that send to other American adversaries, China with Taiwan, for example?
I think overall people are realizing that the United States is going to look out for US interests. And that means rethinking all of these things. We spend money on everything. We defend everybody. We ask for very little back. And I think Trump has made it clear that if we are going to defend you, if we are going to fund NATO, if we are basically going to be the world's policeman, which you can have an argument about whether we should do that or not. But if we are going to do it, then other countries are going to have to pay their fair share too. And I think I know that most Americans are fully on board that.
Are you happy by the position that Keir Starmer's taken, suggesting that they will send UK troops to Ukraine for peace building, peacekeeping operations, also increasing defense spending? What do you make of that?
I wouldn't say I'm happy about it or not happy about it. I would say that having been here in your country for a few days, the UK has seriously extraordinary problems to deal with, whether it's economically or culturally or in terms of immigration and everything else. So I don't know that the average British person should be that excited to have their troops defending someone else's border. They might want to consider defending their own border.
I do want to pick you up on that point. We had J.D. Vance last week at the Munich Security Conference, and he said that the biggest threat that was facing Europe at the moment was a retreat in freedom of speech, fundamental European values, and that was a bigger threat to Europe than Russia and China. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. If our Western countries decide to commit harakiri, it'll be because they've done it to themselves. If we can't defend free speech, if we can't defend open discourse, if we can't make the argument, which this conference is about, by the way, which is that our democracies are good, that Western values are good, that individual rights are good. If we can't do that, then whether China decides to invade us or destroy our currency or whatever might happen with Russia or Ukraine, that will all be secondary. The West needs a reboot. I would say we're having a very strong reboot right now in the United States. There is a feeling that we can fix these problems, fix our border, fix the economy, fix some of this foreign policy stuff, and I think we're going to see that now proliferate across the pond.
I mean, J.D. Vance, he said that we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square. I mean, it's a bit ironic that he's saying that when, for example, Trump's denounced journalists as being the enemies of the people. He's threatened to revoke broadcasting licenses from some news channels. And even more recently, he blocked the Associated Press from attending the White House over a dispute in the name of the Gulf of Mexico.
I have no problem with any of those things. First off, I would say the mainstream media largely is the enemy.
But is Trump defending people who have views that differ to his own? Or is he trying to clamp down?
I mean, the AP doesn't automatically deserve to be in the White House forever.
Should they be removed from it just because they're disputing over the renaming of the Gulf of Mexico?
I think that there's been all sorts of news organizations that have been allowed into these White House press briefings and everything else that have been in dire negligence of what their actual job should be, which is to hold power to account and actually tell the truth, and they haven't done that. Now, if he was trying to close down the AP, if he was using the power of the state to literally
he's threatened to revoke broadcasting licenses.
I think that can be up for debate. If he was raiding their offices and making sure they couldn't do their work, that would be a bigger issue. But just saying you guys can't come into the White House press briefing room anymore, I mean, you also have to understand we're in an absolute technological revolution here too. So the amount of online people that are getting more views, that are actually in many cases doing a much better, more honest job of reporting than the AP, they deserve a shot too.
But you agree that the Associated Press being removed from the White House,
I don't have a problem with them being removed from the White House. There's a finite amount of room in there, and there's an awful lot of places of journalism.
I mean, if we look at Trump, he's often seen as being the savior of American society, Western civilization. And when we look at sort of what defines those foundations in Western culture, we look at democracy, for example. I mean, is Trump that person who's upholding that? Free speech as well. I mean, if we see this, what he's saying about journalists, denying the 2020 election results, is this a man that is upholding those values that he says he wants to make great again?
Yeah, he is. I mean, I think if you look at the last 4 years, or you could look at the last decade of America, where we were told to sit down and shut up and be injected with something that the government decided to inject us with, or you were going to lose your job.
Are you referring to the COVID vaccine?
Yeah, of course. That you weren't allowed to question the COVID vaccine. You weren't allowed to question Anthony Fauci or any of these institutions. We have seen Russia hoaxes. We've seen very fine people hoaxes. We've seen Brett Kavanaugh as a serial rapist. I mean, I can go through the hoax after hoax, the Jussie Smollett hoax. So the media has failed absolutely at what its main job is. So Donald Trump doesn't owe it to any news organization to play footsie with them. Again, I'm not for the government coming in and shutting the offices of a certain news organization, but fighting back. He's representing the American people right now. The American people have had it. CNN is a propaganda outlet. The New York Times, I would say, is a propaganda outlet.
I mean, propaganda outlet, it's a strong term.
Yeah, well, I mean it.
But what is it about them that makes them a propaganda outlet?
CNN lied about the Russia hoax. CNN lied about COVID. And by the way, when I say CNN, we can include MSNBC in this. We can include the New York Times in this. How is it that on my show I didn't get these massive scandals wrong? Very fine people on both sides.
You publish things on your YouTube channel that are correct as well.
Of things.
So when you refer to these news outlets as being propaganda outlets, how much of that?
We're getting to a place in society where it's becoming increasingly very issues where each side is saying that we carve this into you because of your political beliefs. How do we bridge that gap and come together?
I don't know what the answer to that is. I don't think anyone really knows what the answer to that is. I think the more voices that we have, whether it's online or to whatever extent mainstream media has honest voices, and I clearly don't think that there's many of those people, I think you should try to get your news from a variety of sources. I think you should try to make sure that you're not only following, obviously, people on the right or people on the left.
I guess that's always going to be up to debate, and I guess it's going to be interesting to see what's going to happen in the next 4 years. Dave Rubin, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.